Hi everyone, today I'm going to be making Mel from The Secret Life of Pets. I'll be making him as an entire cake. I used 3 8-inch cakes and removed the top from each one, and those white spots you'll be seeing in a minute are what happens when you forget to sift the flour. I placed the cakes one on top of the other as 3 layers, and in between the layers I used chocolate ganache to keep them together. I know the camera's a little out of focus right now. Sorry, it gets better later on. Next I'll be carving out Mel's shape, and this is actually the back, just kind of smoothing it out. And this would be the face. And at this point I realized the cake wasn't tall enough, I needed more height, so I used one of the cake tops. And again you can see I'm smoothing it out using a knife, removing all the corners. Here I'm carving out the stomach, and I used another cake top in order to make the legs, the bent legs. And I'm removing again all the caramelization from the edges and cutting out the shape of the leg. Later on I'll be attaching it with chocolate ganache. And again, to make the other leg, do the same thing. Make sure that they're the same size. I used a ruler to do that. And attach it with chocolate ganache. When you're satisfied with the shape of the cake, you can cover it in ganache, and then you can use your hands and a little bit of water to smooth out all the bumps. We don't want a bumpy Mel. Now, to cover this cake, I used white fondant and I dyed it using ivory and a touch of brown. I rolled it out and covered it from the top part of the cake, and it maybe would have been easier to cut out a rectangle and wrap it around the cake instead. That way there wouldn't have been that much excess fondant at the bottom. So as you can see, I'm using my hands to tighten the fondant around the cake to make sure that it gets the shape that I carved out earlier. I remove all the excess fondant from the bottom, and I use my fingers to accentuate all the creases that I created, and I use the cake smoother to smooth out any bumps that are still there. I used a sculpting tool to kind of get into the fondant and create fur all around the cake. And as we can see in pictures of Mel, he has kind of creases over his eyes. His eyebrows kind of stand out. And so I used the same color fondant to create those eyebrows, and using water and the sculpting tool I blended them in. And I did the same thing for the bottom part of those creases, his actual eyebrows. Just blend them in with some water, and you can see I'm doing the same for the left eyebrow. Next I created dents for the eyes. This is where the eyeballs will go later on. And I also created brown fur, which goes around Mel's mouth, as you can see in pictures. I did this free-handedly. And using the sculpting tool, I carved out the mouth. I used white fondant for eyeballs and placed them in the dents I created earlier. And for the eyelids, I used brown fondant and a circle cutter. And I created semicircles using a knife, which are a little bit smaller than an actual half circle, and placed them over Mel's eyes. To accentuate the eyelids, I rolled out very thin pieces of black fondant and placed them right where the eyelid ends. When I did this for both eyes, glued them in using water. For the pupils, I used small brown circles with a touch of black. And I created the nose using black fondant, and I used a sculpting tool to kind of push in the nostrils. The teeth I cut out of white fondant, as I saw in the picture. And for the ears, I did the same thing I did for the eyebrows, just used the same color fondant and blended in using water and a sculpting tool. The top part of the ears I made out of darker brown fondant, and also, of course, made fur using the sculpting tool as I did before on Mel's entire body. I made small feet out of the same beige colored fondant and pushed in the toes using a knife. place them in the right place. For the front legs, I used the same color fondant as I did before, and I sculpted them out freehandedly and placed them under the collar where they should be, making sure to create the shape that Mel's legs have, where they're thicker at the top and kind of thinner at the bottom. Of course, I did the same thing for the left side, smoothing it out where the collar should be. And lastly, created the fur using the sculpting tool just as we did before. To attach the collar, I used water to wet the area where the collar should be, and I rolled out brown fondant, and using the ribbon cutter, I created a long strap to make it. The color wasn't strong enough, so I used some brown food coloring dialed down with water to paint over it. Now, I didn't realize the camera was off, but I used brown dusting powder to darken the area around the eyes and mouth. And there you have it, there's Mel. Thanks a lot for watching my video. If you liked it, please hit like and share, and more videos will be coming soon. Thanks a lot.